Tonight, when you look at a newborn baby wrapped in a sterile blanket, you are looking at the result of a modern miracle. Infant monitors track every breath, vaccines guard against invisible pathogens, and emergency care is minutes away. Yet keeping a child safe can still feel like a daunting struggle. Now step back 50,000 years into our deep past. There were no sterile rooms, no antibiotics, no emergency services. Biologists estimate that for nearly all of human history, roughly half of all children died before reaching adulthood. For hundreds of thousands of years, almost 1 out of every 2 infants never grew up. And yet, humanity did not collapse. You are here today because every single one of your ancestors survived the most dangerous phase of human life in an unforgiving world. How did nomadic hunter-gatherers living through ice ages, surrounded by apex predators and lethal pathogens, keep something as defenseless as a human baby alive? To understand how ancient humans succeeded, you first have to understand a quirk of human biology. If you watch a newborn zebra fall onto the grass, within minutes it stands up. Within hours, it can outpace a predator. A newborn chimpanzee is born with enough grip strength to cling tightly to its mother's fur as she swings through the canopy. Human babies can do none of this. An infant cannot walk, run, cling, or even hold up its own head. Biologists call this secondary altriciality. We are born astonishingly, dangerously helpless. The reason comes down to an evolutionary compromise between walking upright and having massive brains. Bipedalism required our ancestors' pelvises to become narrower. At the same time, our brains were rapidly expanding. If a human baby remained in the womb until its brain reached the maturity of a newborn ape, its head would be far too large to pass through the birth canal. Mother and child would both perish. So evolution struck a risky deal. Human babies are born 3 to 4 months prematurely compared to other primates. They are, in a biological sense, external fetuses. For an ancient mother moving through a landscape filled with predators, carrying an external fetus was a massive survival hazard. A crying baby in the Paleolithic was an audible beacon for every carnivore within miles. How did early humans solve the problem of a baby that could not hold on? They invented technology to bridge the gap. In 2019, at the site of Armaverana in Italy, archaeologists excavated the 10,000-year-old grave of an infant girl nicknamed Nave. Buried with her were shell beads and pierced red deer teeth. Microscopic wear patterns revealed they had been stitched onto a leather sling that held the baby tightly against her mother's chest. This physical closeness was not just about transport. It was a matter of rapid physiological regulation. Have you ever noticed that the moment you pick up a crying baby and start walking, the baby almost immediately stops crying? That is not an accident. It is an ancient, hardwired survival mechanism. In 2013, neuroscientists at the Rican Brain Science Institute monitored infants when carried versus when held sitting still. The moment the mother stood up and carried the infant, the baby's heart rate dropped, physical movement ceased, and its nervous system shifted into a calm, parasympathetic state. In a wild environment, a baby thrashing and crying while a parent navigated dense brush would attract lethal attention. The carrying reflex was an evolutionary adaptation designed to silence the infant and stabilize its heart rate during movement. Keeping an infant attached to an adult body was the primary barrier against predators and hypothermia. But carrying a helpless child all the clock demands an immense metabolic cost. A foraging mother needed to gather plants, fetch water, and escape danger. She physically could not supply enough calories and protection alone while raising a child that takes a decade to reach independence. No single human mother could raise a child to maturity in the Pleistocene by herself. This brings us to humanity's ultimate survival strategy, alloparenting. Unlike most primates where mothers aggressively guard their newborns, human mothers relied on a network of caretakers, aunts, older siblings, and grandmothers. Anthropologist Kristen Hawkes proposed the grandmother hypothesis after studying hunter-gatherers like the Hadza of Tanzania. She observed that post-reproductive women were the most productive foragers, gathering food for older children, so mothers could dedicate energy to nursing new infants. Humans are one of the very few species on Earth where females live decades past their reproductive years. That evolutionary pattern exists largely because ancient grandmothers kept children from starving. Alloparenting went far beyond watching the baby while mom gathered roots. It extended to shared nursing. In many traditional foraging societies, milk sharing was standard practice. If a mother was injured or died, other lactating women would nurse the infant. A child in an ancient human band did not have a single caregiver. It had an entire community holding, feeding, and protecting it. The phrase, "it takes a village to raise a child," is not just a warm sentiment, it was a strict biological necessity for survival. Yet predators and hunger were only part of the threat. The most relentless killer of ancient children was disease. Dysentery and respiratory infections claimed millions of young lives. Before antibiotics, how did any child survive long enough to build a functioning immune system? The answer lay in the complex biochemistry of human breast milk, combined with long nursing periods. Chemical analysis of fossilized teeth from Paleolithic humans demonstrates that ancient children were typically breastfed for 3 to 5 years. Breast milk is not merely food, it is a dynamic fluid packed with maternal antibodies and specialized sugars called human milk oligosaccharides. These complex sugars pass into the gut to nourish beneficial bacteria like Bifidobacterium infantis, creating a microscopic protective shield that prevents dangerous pathogens from taking hold. For the first several years of life, an infant lived under the active umbrella of its mother's immune memory. As children grew older, ancient parents faced another precarious hurdle: weaning. Transitioning a small child from protective breast milk to wild foods introduced immense risk of infection. Scholars once assumed ancient peoples possessed no specialized equipment for this transition, but bioarchaeology recently uncovered evidence to the contrary. In 2019, researchers analyzed small clay vessels found in prehistoric child graves across Central Europe, dating back over 3,000 years. These vessels were shaped into animal figures with tiny legs and narrow spouts. When scientists analyzed chemical residues absorbed into the porous clay walls, they discovered traces of milk fats from goats, sheep, and cattle. Ancient parents were crafting specialized baby bottles to comfort sick or weaning infants. Even thousands of years ago, parents used art and technology to tenderly nurture their children through weaning. What emerges from archaeological evidence is a perspective that refutes the idea of ancient humans as unfeeling or primitive. Early parents did not view children as replaceable simply because infant mortality was high. When you examine ancient grave sites, you find evidence of profound grief and devotion. In 2018, archaeologists in Alaska discovered the burial of 2 Ice Age infants dating back 11,500 years. They were laid to rest on a bed of crafted hunting points and carved antler rods, dusted with red ochre, a pigment associated with ritual honor, and buried with immense care. Ancient parents understood the fragility of early life. They sang lullabies, carved wooden toys, wrapped their babies in soft furs, and held them close against warm skin through the long, dark nights of the Ice Age. Today, we live in a world of sterilized plastic and modern medicine. We look back at ancient history and wonder how anyone managed to survive without the technology we depend on every day. But the fundamental forces that kept ancient kids alive were never mechanical. They were biological, social, and deeply emotional. It was the living protection of breast milk, the hardwired calm of the carry reflex, the tireless labor of grandmothers, and the unbreakable solidarity of a tribe that refused to let its children perish. Every person living on this planet today is part of an unbroken chain of survivors. You descend from infants who were held through the dark, who were nursed through fevers, and who were carried across hostile landscapes by people who refused to give up on them. Ancient humans kept their children alive through the harshest conditions imaginable, not because it was easy, but because they cared with a fierce devotion that has been passed down directly to us.